Welcome to Blind Reads, where we read stories that we have not previously read or, in some cases, heard of, in an attempt to widen our literary bubble. Today's story is The Siren of the Rhine, authored by William Elliot Griffis and narrated by myself, Samuel Lawrence. In this story, we follow a siren as she uses her music to lure unsuspecting men to an early grave. Enjoy. The father of the fairies, who used to live along and under the river Rhine, was not able always to control his daughters after they had grown up. One of them, named Lorelei, a long time ago, used to appear above the current of the great stream, at the place where the water dashes over the rocks and foams high. It was very hard in that place, or near it, for the sailors to steer their boats, so as not to have them dashed to pieces. Only with cool heads and strong arms could the boatmen get their vessels through in safety. But if they should stop to look at the pretty maidens, or to turn their heads to listen to the lovely music which they made, then they were sure to lose their heads and have the boat go wrong and run upon the rocks. Then, of course, everyone on board was thrown into the boiling waves and drowned. The rocks are so sharp and jagged that when the boat was upset, the poor people were thrown violently against these, and even if spared by the waves, were sure to perish. The fairy, named Lorelei, paid no attention to their cries, but only laughed at them as they struggled in the water. This Lorelei, the chief of the river fairies, was never seen during the day, for during the sunlight she loved to sit among her jewelled caves and remain far down below in the cool depths of the water. During daylight hours, if any mortal tried to catch even a glimpse of her, he sought in vain. It thus happened that some people, and even boatmen on their way down to Rotterdam, laughed at the idea of there being a Lorelei, or any other fairy among the rocks. But when the moon was at its full and shone brightest, and its silvery beams seemed to turn into a fairy-like gauze, woven of mist and moonbeams, the Lorelei was in her happiest mood. As soon as the sun was down and twilight fell on the earth above, she called for her maidens to dress and adorn her lovely form with jewels. They plaited part of her golden hair, braiding it up over the top of her head and around at the back. This made a pretty cap-like arrangement, while behind and down her back the other tresses fell in ripples, so that in the faint evening wind it would float out and gleam and rise and fall fitfully on the breezes, seemingly now silvery and again golden in the moon's rays. A comb of gold studded with rare gems added to the glory of her headdress, which in the dim light from the night skies would glisten like a cluster of stars. No ordinary man could resist such a lure, for even apart from the entrancing music, he would assuredly have the curiosity to see what this resplendent figure on the high rock could be. So, when Lorelei was arrayed in her gorgeous apparel that so heightened her beauty, this fairy would rise out of the current. Then, swimming over to the base of the loftiest rock that rose from near the river's shore, she always had her harp with her. Perching aloft on the top of the pinnacle, she would sweep the strings and make the most entrancing music. Whenever she saw a boat full of mariners coming up or going down the Rhine, she trilled her voice to particular sweetness. Then they could see her among the moonbeams, with her long, golden hair streaming out on the evening breeze, or lightly lifted and rippled when the zephyrs were soft as a breath. It seemed as if her song music was loveliest when the night wind was most faintly sighing. No matter how vehemently even the most stout-hearted sailors might have promised or even vowed to pay no attention to anything they heard while shooting the rapids, they were sure to drop oars and pole to listen when the melody floated through the air. Then the man who steered and had been the loudest in saying that he would clap his hands over his ears and be deaf to any strains, however sweet, was always the first to weaken. He would stand still as if shot through with an arrow and forget all about his duties at the rudder. Then, very quickly, the boat would strike against the rocks. In a moment more, the whole crew would be struggling, soon to sink under the waves, while the boat drifted along, bottom upwards. In their last moments, the drowning men heard the fairies laughing as if they were enjoying good sport. Now, it is said that the only one who ever basked in the favour of the Lorelei was a young and very good-looking fisherman's son named Ulrich. He was his mother's darling and his father's pride, yet none of his brothers were jealous of him. Whenever he appeared at night, the Lorelei would get down from her rock throne and walk along the river's strand to welcome the handsome lad. He never, however he might seek diligently or call loudly, could find her or catch a single glimpse of her by day. But the moment he met her at night, he would be in raptures over her beauty. Sometimes she would sing for him so that he never knew how fast the hours sped away. It was often midnight before Ulrich reached home, and once in a while it was near daybreak in the east. But always before parting from him, Lorelei would point out to her lover the place in the river where, on the next morning, the fish would be found most plentifully. Ulrich would then tell his father and brothers where to cast their nets, and then they always drew up a good boatload of fish. These they sold in the market at a high price, and so had nice clothes and plenty to eat. So they never asked Ulrich where he had been so long the night before, and why he reached home after the household were all in bed, and only their faithful dog Fritz kept watch at the door. His mother warned her youngest son not to go see Lorelei too often, but he only laughed, kissed her, and said he could stop going when he wanted to, which is the way many boys and girls talk, not knowing the power of habit which binds them like a chain. But one night the old fisherman's son did not return, and in the morning, when his mother looked into his room, expecting to call and wake him, she found it empty. The bed was in perfect order, as if no one had slept in it. Putting her hand under the covers, she found no warmth. At once, she gave the alarm to her husband and sons, who were then at their breakfast. Taking their faithful dog with them, they at once set out to find the lad. All day long they searched among the reeds, along the riverbank, along the rocks, and even in the woods and on the hills, but no sign of son and brother was found. It was believed that the siren Lorelei, madly in love with the handsome boy, and though in the form of a pretty woman, having no human heart to feel for his mother, had dragged him down into her caves under the river and deep in the earth to enjoy him as her companion forever. By and by, so many sailors having been drowned and so large a number of merchants having lost their precious treasures in the wrecked boats, it was determined to send a band of brave men to seize the Lorelei and bind her as a prisoner. If she resisted, she was to be put to death. Thus, a danger to be dreaded more than jagged rocks or treacherous currents would be taken away. Then, the merchants in Cologne and Rotterdam would be made happy by piling up fortunes to enjoy and leave to their children. Before starting on the expedition to capture the Siren, every man was taken into the cathedral, and before the altar made to cross himself on the breast and swear not to listen to Lorelei's song. All of them wore helmets with thick, padded earmuffs coming down over their ears and tied tight. All the orders of the captain were to be given by signs without his speaking a word. But what availed arrows, swords and spears, helmets and armour, and what were the strong muscles of brave men against a beautiful fairy? When the company had landed silently on the shore without endangering their boats by going near the rocks, they suddenly found that they could not move. For the Lorelei had cast a spell over them, so that not one could lift hand or foot. All night long the captain and his soldiers stood upright and motionless, as if made of wax and in a museum, while the moonbeams were reflected from their helmets, weapons, and armour. Yet, during all these night hours, they had the power of eyesight. They saw all that was going on, and this was what they witnessed. Just as the first gleams of the upcoming sun were beginning to streak the midnight blue of the skies with light and make rosy the east, but while at the same time the moon cast a pale light on the strange scene, they discerned plainly the Lorelei. She was standing on the highest pointed rock that rose out of the Rhine. There the beautiful creature was, as if in a waiting attitude, before a mirror, and about to retire to her bed for sleep. She took off all her ornaments and jewels. She unbound the bands of her shining hair and unplaited the braids until her tresses fell in one glorious mass like a cataract of gold. She threw away, one by one, her comb, her girdle, her splendid robes, and each of her pearls and gems into the foaming waters. Then she chanted a spell to draw the waters up to the very top of the rock until the wavelets rolled over her shining feet. At this moment, 2 white horses with long flowing manes rose up, pawing and snorting out of the flood. In golden harnesses they drew a chariot made of a single emerald, with sapphire wheels. She mounted within the vehicle, and at a word from the Siren the steeds drove away, with the swiftness of a lightning flash, and disappeared. Gradually the river subsided to its usual low level. Minute by minute passed, and the spell over the soldiers was gradually broken. First they could move their toes, then their fingers, and after a while their arms and legs. When at last, by a sign, the captain gave the order to march, they faced about towards the river. Embarking on their boats, they rowed down the Rhine to Basel and Cologne, and told their weird story. Never again was the Lorelei seen by man. The people who live around the old place of moonlight music say that the Siren felt insulted at this invasion of her domain. In her view, what were the lives of a few sailors and the loss of one fisherman's son for a lover compared with such music as she gave so freely? So, to punish the foolish men, she has never again left her shining caves under the Rhine to appear on earth. Yet, inspired by her example, the musicians have continued her sweet music, while the poets, never weary of telling her story in their rhymes and stanzas. Well, there you have it. It seems the fairy thought her music was worth more than a human life. Let me know what you thought of the story below, and thank you for listening.